Do you believe there are angels among us? Because what happened that night will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, science, and the impossible. Get ready for a true story, emotional, mysterious, and beyond explanation. This isn't just something you watch, it's something you feel. Stay until the end. What you're about to see might reignite something time tried to extinguish. Isabela was only 6, yet she carried in her body and soul the kind of scars many wouldn't bear, even at 60. Her brown curls, once full of life and bouncing with the slightest breeze, were now thinning, surrendered to chemotherapy. Her large, curious eyes, once gleaming with discovery, had dimmed, not from a lack of life, but from an excess of pain. A pain that couldn't be explained by fever or lab results, a kind of pain that quietly stole away her childhood. The cancer had a rare name. Even rarer was its type. Doctors used technical terms, as if wrapping the truth in sterile words could soften its weight. It was a silent enemy, one that spread fast and hurt even in stillness. Her tiny veins were marked by daily needles, her small arms bruised in purple patches that never had time to heal. The body had grown fragile, but the spirit, oh, it still resisted, quietly, invisibly, hidden behind tired eyes that no longer looked in the mirror. Her mother, Carla, was the kind of woman life never asked if she could endure. It simply demanded it. A seamstress since the age of 14, hands worn by pins and postponed dreams, now used those same hands to fix hospital bedsheets, hold trembling cups of water, and gently tie her daughter's hair before yet another procedure. She had left her small shop behind, lost clients, forgotten bills, because as long as her daughter's heart kept beating, hers only knew how to do one thing: stay, without promises, without guarantees, just stay. The father, he was never part of the story. He disappeared before the first test, saying he couldn't handle sickness, vanished as if pain were contagious. And maybe in a way it was, because true love suffers alongside. Carla, in her silence, no longer remembered what it was like to sleep without the beeping of machines, or to live without constantly checking, is she hurting today? Life for the past 2 years had become room 207 in the children's oncology wing, and there, between white walls, half-open curtains that failed to block out the sun, and the relentless hum of monitors, mother and daughter built a universe of their own, a world of whispered lullabies, improvised stories, and crayon drawings scribbled over medical prescriptions. Tiny daily victories, one more spoonful of food, a faint smile through the nausea, one feverless night. Everything became a celebration, every moment a quiet hope. The nurses already knew Isabela by name and by her sweetness. She always said thank you, even during her worst moments. And though the body was weakened, she insisted on wishing goodnight to everyone who came in with medication. That child, even in pain, transformed the atmosphere. There was something different about her, as if the suffering hadn't extinguished the light, just pushed it deeper inside, where it still burned, faint but alive. That week, however, the tone had changed. The lead doctor avoided eye contact. The nurses whispered more often. The tests were showing what none of them wanted to admit. Her body was exhausted, like a little bird that had fought with all its wings but now shivered. The infection wasn't responding. The medications had lost their grip, and despite every effort, signs pointed to an approaching goodbye. Yet strangely, a different kind of silence hovered over that hospital room that night. It was as if something or someone was drawing near, crossing an invisible line, as if beside the sorrow, another presence approached with quiet, almost imperceptible steps. Carla, seated beside her daughter, no longer cried, not because the pain had lessened, but because her soul had entered a state of surrender. Only those who have held the hand of someone nearing the end can recognize that silence. It has its own weight. It suspends time. It announces either a miracle or a farewell. And in that exact moment, between a tear drying at the corner of her eye and a heart monitor beeping slower than before, something began to shift, not with noise, not with flashing lights, but with a calm that felt foreign to this world. Carla had no idea yet, but that night would not be remembered as the night of the end. It would be remembered as the beginning of something no one, absolutely no one, could explain in human words. At Angels Among Us, you don't just watch, you feel. Each video is a reminder that the unseen still leaves marks, and that the impossible may simply be waiting to be told. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because here, every story carries a sign, every silence has a purpose, and every scene might be exactly what your soul needed to hear today. This isn't just content, it's a visit from heaven to your heart. That night, the sky seemed to weep along with everything that was about to unfold. Raindrops slid down the window as if trying to come in and offer comfort, while the steady beeping of the machines inside the room set a somber rhythm to that silent farewell. The pediatric oncology ward hallway, normally busy with nurses rushing, doctors scribbling, and children's voices clinging to hope, was now overtaken by an eerie stillness, heavy, respectful, almost as if every step knew it shouldn't echo there. Not that night. The medical forecast was clear. The report had been delivered with soft voices and lowered eyes, leaving no room for hopeful interpretations. She probably won't make it through the night, and those words, though gently spoken, weren't surprising. They had already been announced in the tired faces of the staff, in the absence of new treatment plans, in the resigned silence that settled over the room. Test results confirmed what the body had been screaming for weeks. There was no response to treatment anymore. The disease had taken over everything, her body, the room, time itself. Lying on the small bed, wrapped in sheets, changed with more love than duty, was Isabela. Her pale face still held traces of the vibrant little girl who once ran barefoot through the backyard, wearing makeshift costumes her mother had sewn from. Colorful scraps. Now, though, long lashes seemed too heavy to lift, her cheeks had sunk and her calm expression concealed battles too vast for someone so young. Exhaustion could be seen in every breath, slow, as if each one had to ask permission from her tired body to keep going. Carla sat close but no longer cried. That stage had passed. Pain had taken on another form, the kind where tears turn into silent vigil. Her fingers gently clasped her daughter's, her cheek resting on the edge of the pillow, her voice barely audible as she sang old lullabies. Songs that once cradled a healthy child to sleep now served as a compass in the darkness of an impending loss. With every whispered verse, she tried to recall what life was like before the diagnosis, before the hospital rooms, before the pitying glances. But no matter how hard she tried, everything seemed to begin and end right there, in that room, on that bed, within that fragile breath. The nurses had done everything they could. They changed the sheets with ceremonial care, turned off the extra oxygen because it no longer mattered, dimmed the lights to rest mode, as if giving a gentle, silent goodbye. One younger nurse had quietly left a small stuffed bear on the shelf. She said nothing, just looked at Isabela with the helplessness of someone trying to hold time still with her bare hands. Another nurse partially closed the curtain, honoring that moment like the closing of a scene in a quiet, sacred play. The heart monitor showed widening gaps between each beat. Every beep was a countdown everyone pretended not to hear, though no one could ignore it. A doctor passed by, glanced inside, and kept walking. No need to interrupt. It wasn't a moment for medicine. It was a moment for humanity, for surrender, for something far beyond charts and tubes, something invisible that moved in silence. Outside, the storm intensified. Lightning slashed the sky with jagged lines, as if the world itself were in mourning. The sound of rain on the hospital roof mixed with Carla's held-back sobs, and despite the cold of dawn creeping in, the room felt strangely warm, like something had arrived that couldn't be seen, only felt, in the way the sheet settled, in the faint pulse still flickering in Isabela's neck, in the quiet sense of peace spreading over everything. No camera was recording, no official witness was there, and yet everything pointed to something extraordinary drawing near, as if time itself were holding its breath, as if pain for the first time had been asked to step aside. And it is precisely in that space, in the gap between human surrender and divine possibility, that this story begins to shift, because just before the last tear could fall, a whisper was still waiting to be spoken, and once it was heard, nothing would ever be the same again. Do you believe something invisible can touch what medicine has already given up on? If this moment stirred something inside you, leave a comment. I too felt something no one else could see. Sometimes a simple story like that is what reignites someone else's fading faith. Just before her tired body gave in to deep sleep, Isabela slightly parted her lips and whispered something that, at first, sounded like the usual murmur of a feverish child. "Mommy, he's coming. The man in white." Her voice was soft, almost dissolving into the air, as if it belonged to another realm. Carla, exhausted after endless sleepless nights, assumed it was just another delusion. In recent days, Isabela had been mixing dreams with memories, confusing names, seeing drawings on the hospital walls. But there was something different in her tone, a certainty that didn't seem to come from illness, but from a peace no one expected. The phrase dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Carla didn't reply. She just ran her fingers through her daughter's damp hair, trying to soothe what she couldn't understand. Then, with a serene smile, Isabela turned her head to the side and fell asleep. It wasn't a restless or heavy sleep, it was calm, as if she had finally received the visit she was waiting for. The heart monitor, which had been irregular, continued its rhythm, now slower, more spaced out. The nurse on duty logged the vitals with the gentle precision of someone who knew the end was near. At that exact moment, the air in the room changed. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a smell. It was a shift that can't be described in medical terms. A subtle yet intense presence. Miriam, the most experienced nurse on shift, would later say it felt like the room had been visited by a different atmosphere, a light warmth that didn't come from blankets or machines. She didn't tell anyone that night. She simply closed her eyes for a second, placed a hand over her chest and let the tears fall, not knowing exactly why. Strangely, nothing moved, nothing visible at least, but even the machines seemed to lower their volume. Carla, not knowing where the sense of comfort was coming from, rested her forehead on her daughter's hand and just remained there, feeling, for the first time in days, that the room felt full, not with people, but with something good, something that didn't threaten, didn't hurt, didn't frighten, a presence that reminded her of the nights she used to sing Isabela to sleep at home, when life was simple and fear wasn't part of their routine. Then something even stranger occurred. The nurse leaving the room felt a chill down her spine despite being fully covered. No windows were open, no air conditioning was on, yet it felt like she had crossed from one world into another, from the ordinary into the sacred. She looked back and saw the room's light still glowing, warm, soft. She considered going back in, but didn't. Instead, she sat quietly on one of the corridor benches, her heart unsettled, unsure why. Many accounts of near-death experiences or unexplained healings speak of similar sensations. Invisible presences that are deeply felt, touches that leave no marks on the skin but heal something deeper. Scientists often label it hallucination, a neurological response to extreme stress, or a reaction to medication. But those who felt it know it's different. And that night, in a room that had witnessed countless goodbyes, the unexplainable made itself known, not with noise, but with silence. When the doctors returned at shift change, they found the room too quiet. Isabela was sleeping, with an expression none of them had ever seen, not even during moments of improvement, a peaceful look detached from pain. No sweat, no trembling, no moans, just a small body breathing deeply, like someone resting after a long walk. Carla was still there, teary-eyed but no longer crying out of sorrow. Somehow she knew something was happening, even if she couldn't say what. The night went on, but the story had already changed. Even without evidence, there was something all who entered that room would carry, a warmth that defied logic, a phrase that no one could forget, and a shared sense that someone or something had been there, and that something left no doubt in those who were about to witness what came next. Do you believe that sometimes the invisible is more real than everything we can touch? Write in the comments, "I felt that." Your words might be exactly what someone needs to read today. Around 3 a.m., the slow, agonizing beeping of the heart monitor, once a somber countdown, suddenly changed. The fading rhythm gave way to something steady, almost gentle. In that windowless room, where shadows clung quietly to the walls, a subtle presence seemed to settle in, as if the air had thickened, yet felt strangely lighter. It wasn't something anyone could explain. It was something you felt. The night nurse, long used to the cold routine and abrupt goodbyes, felt a chill crawl up her spine. But it wasn't fear. It was as if time had paused and then restarted. Under a new command, under those white sheets, where only stillness had remained, Isabela began to breathe more easily. Her chest rose and fell with a calm rhythm that seemed impossible to associate with the same little girl who could barely open her eyes hours earlier. Her lids, now half open, revealed a peaceful gaze, the kind seen in those who've just returned from a place where pain does not exist. Her small fingers, once cold and limp in her mother's hand, moved with intention. They tightened around that familiar grip. Carla's eyes widened and a shiver raced through her back, but instinct took over. She leaned in, and what came next changed everything. He touched me. The voice was soft but steady. No groaning, no fear, just certainty. Her brown eyes weren't fully focused yet, but carried a light that hadn't shone in a long time, a quiet glow, as if, for a moment, the soul had returned before the body. Then came the rest. He was tall, he wore white, and he shined. He told me, "The pain is gone, my daughter." Carla's knees gave out, not out of panic, but something far deeper, reverence. Deep down, without needing to understand, she knew those words weren't just a child's feverish dream. They were a message. That wasn't just a story. That was a visit, a presence many would call impossible, but in that hour felt more real than any diagnosis. What struck most was how Isabela said it, not with excitement, not in disbelief, but with peace, the kind that only comes from a place the rest of us haven't seen. For a child who knew pain better than she knew toys, the tone was ordinary, like it had always been meant to happen, and maybe, for those who've walked near eternity, it had. The way she said, "daughter," made Carla realize something deeper still. Whoever it was, knew her name, knew their bond. Outside the door, a strange quiet lingered in the hallway. A nurse carrying charts paused. There was a weight in the air, but not heavy, warm, like the smell of jasmine mixed with sunlight through a crack in the curtains. Whatever it was, it didn't come from a machine. It wasn't listed in any protocol, but it was there, marking the space with a peace that even the most skeptical staff couldn't ignore. Next door, the lead doctor was mentally reviewing his earlier prognosis: progressive failure, irreversible signs. He'd told the team it was a matter of hours. There had been no margin for hope, not in the labs, not in the stats. And now, something had shifted. The monitor didn't lie. The body that had been slipping away seemed to have found breath again, and then came the unthinkable. Isabela wanted to sit up, asked for water, looked for her doll, asked if it was morning already, as if she had simply napped. There was no trace of fever, no grimace of pain, only a serenity that couldn't be contained within those walls. This is the part of the story where even skeptics stop doubting and start listening, because not everything can be written down. Some things surpass scalpels, theories, and spreadsheets. Some encounters defy logic. They're not explained. They're felt, just like what happened that night at 3 a.m. when life chose to continue. Have you ever felt that someone showed up at the exact moment, as if sent by something greater? Write in the comments, "I believe in the right touch, at the right time." Your comment might be the spark of faith someone out there needs today. That cloudy morning, the sun had yet to overcome the haze of dawn. The nurses walked slowly through the corridors, as if the silence from the previous night still echoed with every step. Isabela's room, once a sanctuary for farewells, now radiated a type of calm no one could explain. Carla, exhausted, felt her daughter's hand, warm and alive in hers. But she didn't dare say a word. She feared breaking the spell she didn't yet understand, so she just watched, like someone witnessing something between a dream and a miracle. Dr. Arlindo, the attending physician, was a methodical man, known for surgical precision and his unshaken tone in delivering even the worst news. When he heard the girl had woken up and asked for water in a steady voice, he frowned but said nothing. He ordered the morning tests purely out of protocol, as if the child's body still needed to prove to him that what they were seeing was real. He hadn't even believed she'd make it through the night. Blood tests, CT scans, ultrasounds. He requested them. All head down, clipboard trembling in his hand. The lab worked quickly. Inside, the staff were just as curious as they were skeptical. These were tests they had run 1,000 times before, always showing the same sentence: deformed cells, altered markers, signs of inflammation. But this time the numbers seemed to mock logic. The blood was clean, no sign of infection, no misshapen white cells. The liver, once failing, now showed full function. But what made the specialist rip off his glasses and stand speechless was the scan. The tumor was gone. No shadow, no mass. Only healthy tissue, glowing slightly around the edges, as if something had healed from the inside out, without leaving a scar. Whispers began to spread through the ward. Nurses exchanged discreet smiles, but their eyes sparkled with awe. One of them, Mrs. Nair, a devout Catholic, clutched a small medal of the Virgin Mary to her chest, closed her eyes for a second and whispered, "I saw when he passed, and now I know he wasn't from this earth." She wasn't referring to a colleague. That sentence, whispered quietly, spread like wildfire among those who'd been on the night shift. Dr. Arlindo said nothing at first. He locked his office door, placed both hands on the desk, and took a deep breath. He looked over the tests once, twice, 3 times. He pulled up the previous scan and compared it to the new one. The difference was staggering. That child shouldn't be standing, shouldn't be smiling, shouldn't be alive, but she was. And what was even more unsettling, there were no lab errors, no sample mix-ups. Everything had been verified. The girl was healed. In the hallway, Carla waited silently, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but now carrying something new, hope. She didn't dare celebrate yet, but couldn't ignore the tightness in her chest that wordlessly said something extraordinary had happened. When the doctor finally stepped out of his office, he said nothing. He just looked at the mother and daughter and let silence speak for him. A silence that said, "I saw it, I was there, and I can't explain it." Isabela, sitting on the bed, cradling her old doll in her arms, looked out the window. The cloudy sky began to part just enough for a soft ray of sunlight to peek through. She smiled, turned to her mother, and said with a simplicity that pierced the soul, "He said it's time to play again, Mommy." And in that moment, everyone on the floor understood what it means when life decides to challenge death. A moment that can't fit into medical reports, that isn't taught in universities. A moment where faith, science, and silence all share the same space, where each passing second becomes proof that the impossible sometimes simply happens. If you've ever experienced a healing that medicine couldn't explain, write it in the comments. Someone might rediscover hope through your story. Dr. Helena was known among her colleagues as the ice wall of the pediatric ward, always impeccable. With her lab coat without a single crease out of place, she walked the halls like someone commanding a war. She never allowed herself emotion, not even in the most desperate cases. But upon seeing Isabela's test results that morning, something broke inside her. Her hands trembled, the once unshakable eyes filled up, and without saying a word, she left the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the cold wall and allowed, for the first time in years, tears to run uncontrollably. It wasn't sadness. It was something greater, something beyond what medicine could name. One of the nurses, Marcos, a veteran of the night shift, saw Helena's face as she stepped out. He understood without her saying anything. He entered the room, looked at the child smiling in bed, the same one who just hours earlier was between life and death, and dropped to his knees, not out of despair, but out of gratitude, awe, and reverence. The scene was silent, but carried a weight few moments in life ever do. Between science and the unexplainable, a sacred space was opening there, in plain sight for those willing to see. In the corner of the restroom, Ana Paula, a newly graduated nurse still full of questions about the world, watched everything. With her eyes fixed on the now static monitor, where once had pulsed the alarm of progressive failure, she gently removed her badge. It wasn't a resignation. It was a symbolic gesture, as if to say, "Today, human knowledge is not enough." She walked to the window and, without knowing exactly why, lifted her eyes to the sky and whispered something. A prayer? A thank you? Even she couldn't say. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. The cafeteria, usually full of rushed conversations between shifts, remained silent for hours. The professionals present there spoke with their eyes. They whispered Isabela's name between spoons and forks, and each one, in their own way, tried to reorganize the internal logic that held together their daily routine of bandages, charts, and bills. What do you do when science fails, and the impossible happens before your eyes? The answer wasn't in any manual. Even the most skeptical, those who avoided chapels and rejected words like faith, miracle, or soul, walked more slowly through the corridors that day. Passing through the oncology ward no longer felt the same. The presence many claimed to feel, an uncommon peace, a warmth with no source, seemed to remain there, between the beds, as a living reminder of something that defied explanation. It wasn't about religion. It was about something that touched the deepest core of human existence, the line between death and life. and what may sometimes come from the invisible. Do you believe there are things science still can't explain? If something ever made you question everything, a moment, a healing, a silence that spoke louder, share it with us. Write in the comments, "I've seen the invisible too." Sometimes, a simple story is enough to give someone the strength to believe again. The hospital's administration, fearing backlash and ethical scrutiny, recorded the case as a spontaneous remission. The medical record was edited. The staff was instructed not to speak about it, but their glances told another story, and Isabela was now running through the corridors holding a doll in her hand, as if she had merely awakened from a nightmare. The director's office, lined with neatly labeled folders and framed diplomas, became a stage of silent tension that morning. The hush in the room wasn't out of respect. It was strategic. Everyone present understood the weight of what had occurred hours earlier, but none dared name it. Isabela's case was officially labeled a spontaneous remission, a rare term used in extreme unexplained recoveries, now repurposed as a bureaucratic shield against questions medicine couldn't answer. The report was rewritten in sterile clinical language, scrubbed of any words like miracle, faith, or intervention. The truth remained outside those pages. Doctors were summoned individually and advised to remain ethical and discreet should anyone inquire. The phrase repeated most often in administrative halls was, "This hospital cannot be seen as a place of belief." Yet behind the scenes, exchanged glances spoke louder than any printed memo. They couldn't unsee what had happened. The same little girl who had barely been breathing just hours before was now hopping on the hospital gurney as if it were a toy. She ran barefoot, in her blue hospital pajamas, curls bouncing, dragging a pink-ribboned rag doll. Her laughter echoed through the oncology wing, where beeping machines were usually the only soundtrack. Seasoned nurses, accustomed to quiet departures and painful goodbyes, stopped in their tracks as she passed. One dropped a vial of saline upon seeing her twirl down the hallway, arms wide. He said nothing, just watched, hand trembling, eyes glassy. Some tried to explain it all away. Misdiagnosis, a rare reaction to treatment, lab error, but inside they knew this was something else entirely. Carla, the mother, now carried a different kind of exhaustion. Sitting in one of the garden's benches, she watched her daughter picking flowers like someone who'd never known what it was to be confined to a bed. Though the fatigue of 2 years still lingered in her gaze, something within her had shifted, as if hope had stopped being a waiting game and finally arrived. When one of the hospital's psychologists approached, Carla grabbed her arm and whispered, "I saw my daughter dying, and now I see her alive. Explain that with your diploma." The psychologist didn't try. She simply sat beside her and wept. Though officially silenced, the story began to spread as these things do, not with headlines, but with whispers. A few other parents claimed to have heard singing that night, floating down the hallway. Some said they felt a warm breeze brush over them despite the sealed windows. One mother swore her nonverbal son whispered, "There's light here that morning." Coincidence? Imagination? Or a ripple from something greater? No one could say, but something in the hospital had changed. For a brief moment it was as if time bent inward and allowed interference. Something from elsewhere had touched that corridor where pain so often ruled. Under pressure from leadership, the administration tried to steer attention away. A formal memo reminded staff of the need for scientific posture in the face of uncommon events. But those who signed the document did so with trembling hands. The security footage from that night glitched. The pediatric ward's wall clock had stopped, exactly at 3:17 a.m., the very minute Isabela's erratic vitals had suddenly stabilized. The maintenance technician later confirmed the clock's mechanisms were intact. It had just stopped and resumed ticking half an hour later. A few nights later, a quiet gathering formed on the hospital rooftop. Not a vigil, not a service, just a shared silence. Staff who had seen and felt something they couldn't unfeel. No one said miracle aloud, but neither did they say coincidence. Near the center of the pediatric wing, next to the brightly colored fish tank, Isabela sat drawing. With crayons and loose sheets of paper, she sketched a tall figure in white, arms extended and smiling. Beside him stood a curly-haired girl with wide eyes. When asked who the man was, Isabela replied softly, "He's the one who told me to come back." Then she went back to coloring. Sometimes it's easier to hide than to try explaining what defies logic. If you've ever experienced something no one would believe, write in the comments, "I saw it, I felt it, and that's enough. Your story might be the encouragement someone needs to believe again. Carla, who for months had only had the strength to beg, now knelt to give thanks. She began visiting hospitalized children, sharing Isabela's story with parents who had lost hope. He still enters dark rooms, she would say. Isabela, still so young, always replied with the phrase that became etched in everyone's memory. "Mommy, he called me daughter, he knew my name." Carla, once consumed by despair, now walked with a different kind of urgency, the need to share what she had witnessed. The cold hospital floor, once the stage of her silent pleas, now felt her knees bowed not in anguish, but in gratitude. Her heart, once crushed by fear, now beat with a new rhythm, faith. And it wasn't just her faith, it was a calm fire, spreading softly wherever she went. At each bedside she brought a quiet presence, a look that said, "I know the pain, but I also know there's something greater holding all of this." Isabela's name began to travel in whispers through the children's ward, not as a clinical case, but as a breath of hope. Some doctors cautiously mentioned it to other parents, careful not to break protocols, but often letting slip one simple sentence: "There are things science still can't explain." Carla didn't need microphones. Her testimony echoed in her actions. She brought toys, children's Bibles, little drawing books. She sat beside exhausted mothers like she once was. She didn't promise healing, but she sowed belief. She spoke of the night when everything seemed to end, and yet began again. Sometimes she'd hold the cold hands of a child and whisper, "He still enters dark rooms." She never explained who. She didn't need to. The words did something inside those who listened. Eyes lit up with a new kind of brightness. And when Isabela joined her, the effect was even deeper. The little girl would walk between beds with her beloved doll, and when asked what she remembered, she never hesitated. "Mommy, he called me daughter, he knew my name." And somehow it felt like the whole room paused for a heartbeat. That phrase, simple yet profound, became a sacred whisper among those who had witnessed her recovery. In different corners of the hospital, some staff began quietly writing inside their uniforms, right above the heart, "He knows my name," as if reminding themselves that there's a gaze that sees beyond diagnoses, visiting hours, and human limitations. A gaze that sees what can't be seen. Curiously, the presence of Carla and Isabela began to move not only the patients and families, but also the hospital staff themselves. Nurses who had been ready to resign chose to stay. Volunteers began showing up. A chapel that once sat empty now welcomed daily visitors. No campaigns, no announcements, just the ripple effect of something sacred touching the unexplained and leaving a mark. And Carla, though scarred by everything she'd lived through, now smiled gently. She knew some wounds never fully disappear, but they can become guiding lights for those still walking through the dark. If you've ever seen a mother fight with everything she had, or if you were that mother in silence, leave a comment. I know what it feels like. Sometimes that one sentence is all another woman needs to read today to keep going. None of the specialists wanted to sign off on any report, not out of negligence, but out of reverence. Because every protocol that upheld that hospital, all the charts, scales, and clinical forecasts, suddenly felt fragile in the face of what they had witnessed. Clipboards grew heavy in their hands, and the silence between one note and the next spoke, louder than the patient records. What happened couldn't be put into words, and deep down no one wanted to reduce the extraordinary to a cold statistic. That day, science bowed before something it could not control. Even though management tried to reframe it as spontaneous remission, the hallways knew the truth. There was a different, almost sacred, atmosphere in the air. Even the machines seemed quieter, as if aware that for a brief moment they had witnessed something that time itself could never erase. Some of the older staff whispered that they had felt something similar before, but never with such intensity. It was as if a breath of eternity had crossed the heavy routines of their shifts, and that no one wanted to forget. Some began to question old choices. A medical resident changed specialties, saying he wanted to be closer to people than to machines. A nurse started jotting down patient phrases and taping them inside her locker, daily reminders that there's more between IVs and needles than it seems. Even the cleaning lady, Donna Ivone, who had waxed those same floors for 17 years, began leaving a small flower on the windowsill of the room where it all happened. A simple gesture, yet filled with faith. It was as if, in a hospital so used to death, something had been brought back to life, the capacity to be amazed. What happened wasn't just about a child coming back. It was about what rose up within everyone who witnessed it. Many doctors, though they didn't admit it, started looking at patients differently. Empathy stopped being a buzzword in lectures. It became practice. Not because they were trained to do so, but because they had been touched. Because something invisible passed through them. And when the invisible is real, it leaves deep marks. Isabela, the little protagonist of this miracle, had no idea of the revolution she had set in motion. To her, it was simple. She woke up, no longer felt pain, and just wanted to play. But the way she looked at the world carried a new light, the kind only those who visited the dark can carry. Many say children forget, but there was a quiet wisdom in the way she held her doll, in the care she showed to other patients, that disproved any notion of forgetting. As if she somehow knew, to live is a gift you carry with tenderness. Amid all this, a silent agreement settled among the staff. Some miracles don't need to be explained. They just need to be respected, and maybe even protected. That's why they chose not to search for answers. Deep down they knew putting into words what happened would diminish it. It would shrink the greatness of what they saw into a technical paragraph, a footnote. Like trying to bottle the wind, better to keep it in their hearts, in their memories, and let it keep blowing, wherever else it may be needed. Some things don't need to be explained, only felt. If you've ever experienced something that defied logic, write in the comments. Not everything real needs proof. Your story might remind someone that the invisible is real too. Isabela is now 9 years old. Her hair has grown thick and curly, and her eyes shine as if they hold a secret quietly stored in her heart. The scar from the feeding tube has disappeared, and the medical tests show no trace of any abnormality. But what stands out most about her is not found in clinical data or physical recovery. It's in the lightness with which she lives. Anyone around her can feel it. A rare serenity for a child her age. There's no fear, no rush. When she runs across the schoolyard, it's like she's dancing with the wind. When she stops to listen, she listens deeply, as if truly hearing. As if she had visited a place where time and pain moved differently and came back carrying something invisible, but eternal. Every now and then, someone approaches with curiosity. A new teacher, a neighbor, a classmate. The question is almost always the same, even if phrased differently. Isabela, what happened when you were sick? And her answer never changes. With the same ease as if she were naming her favorite color, she says, "It was him, the man in white." She says it like that, with a capital H you can hear in her voice. When asked for more details, she just smiles gently and changes the subject. Not because she forgot, but because she knows some things only make sense in silence. Carla, her mother, tried for a long time to put it all into words. She consulted psychologists, spoke with theologians, read similar stories from other people around the world. At times she wondered if it had all been a hallucination born out of despair. But every time doubt crept in, all it took was a glance at Isabela asleep and the memory of alarms once announcing their final goodbye. Now the only sounds from her room are soft breathing and giggles in the middle of dreams. Peace had taken the place of restless vigils. At home, they still keep the drawing Isabela made. Weeks after being discharged, a sheet folded in half, simple crayon lines, a tall figure dressed in white holding the hand of a small child. In the background, a golden sky with what seems to be an open door. When Carla asked what it was, the answer came instantly. It was when he called me his daughter and took me there but said I couldn't go in yet. That mommy was waiting. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said it, without fear, without exaggeration, like someone describing a visitor who had come by and promised to return when the time is right. The doctors still don't have an explanation. The medical file says, spontaneous remission. The case was left out of medical presentations and never mentioned at conferences. Yet, in the hospital corridors, whispered stories still pass between shifts. Stories of a presence, an unexplainable warmth, a peace that lingered in the air for days. Some staff asked for transfers. Others began to attend places of worship they once avoided. But all of them, without exception, carried with them the memory of that room and the smiling little girl who walked out on her own after being declared lost. In interviews, Carla avoids words like miracle or divine intervention. She prefers to say something happened, something that changed everything, and she no longer needs to understand it in order to believe. When she speaks to other parents going through similar battles, She always ends with the same sentence. If my daughter is alive today, it's because someone stepped into that room when no one else could. And as she says it, her eyes turn upward, not to ask, but to give thanks, as someone who recognizes that there is a force watching over things our eyes can't see. Isabela's story is now shared in churches, support groups, touching videos that go viral unintentionally. But the most powerful part isn't what happened, it's what came after. Faith didn't stay locked in that one moment. It kept growing, taking form in daily kindness, quiet prayers before bed, and the way they treat people. Isabela and Carla never turned their experience into spectacle, they turned it into seed. And each time someone hears their story, something begins to grow silently in another soul. Today, when she walks through the same corridors where it all took place, the old staff members smile quietly. Some touch their foreheads, as if making a reverent gesture. Others simply watch, misty-eyed, as if witnessing something sacred all over again. Because time passed, but the impact remained. Isabela wasn't just healed, she was sent back, with a purpose. And when she sits in her room, doll in hand, she still sometimes whispers the words that have stayed with her since that night. He called me daughter. He knew my name. Some stories aren't about loud miracles, but about silent touches that change everything. Isabela didn't just come back to life. She returned carrying something that science can't explain, but the heart recognizes. Carla didn't shout victory, and she knelt in gratitude, because when the invisible shows up, even fear grows quiet and hope stands tall. And if even the doctors stopped trying to understand, it's because they realized not everything needs to be proven to be real. New stories like this are being told, and each one carries the power to rekindle a forgotten faith. Click on the next video and keep diving into stories that transform. See you there.